this medicine is really powerful. It can absolutely traumatize people, and it can hurt people if used incorrectly. Kambo is an Amazonian medicine that comes from the skin secretion of this very specific species of tree frog called the Phylomedusa bicolor. What I have seen is a lot of damn near miraculous outcomes that continue to just blow my mind. If somebody wanted, could potentially take it through drug development and make it an FDA-approved medicine, which might give more people access to healing.
It's probably not going to go mainstream anytime soon.
I've had journals be total hostile to me, attack me, say, oh, you guys just want to get high. And I'm like, did you even read the paper? People in the Amazon, it didn't even use it so much as a medicine. It was for magic.
All right, Caitlin, walk me through the very first time you had a Kambo experience.
Okay, so I'll preface this story a little bit with the first time I ever even heard about Kambo. And this was in 2011. I was at an ayahuasca center in Iquitos, and someone had mentioned this practice to me. And I thought, God, that sounds so stupid and dangerous and reckless and crazy. Why would anyone do that? I didn't think much of it. And then a few years later, a friend came by and was like, wow, I've been going like so deep with this frog medicine. And I was like, oh, is that the thing I heard about? It's like, yeah. And he told me all about his experience. And it was the first time someone had actually told me anything good about Kambo, other than it's terrible, you feel like you're dying, all the drama. So I was like, okay, take me with you. And this was in 2015. There really wasn't a lot of people that knew much about Kambo. There were not a lot of people practicing or serving it. It was a bit obscure and even more fringe than it is now. And I went to this ceremony I drove like 3 hours there with my friend. And I didn't really have any expectations. I was very much kind of just a young, curious, psychonautical explorer. And I knew that there was going to be burning involved. I knew there was going to be vomiting involved. But other than that, there wasn't even a lot of information on the internet at this time. And the whole experience ended up being unexpectedly profound for me. And the biggest takeaway that I got from that first ceremony was trying to kind of reconcile this feeling of like holding an ancestral wound that didn't belong to me. And this was also a time of my life where I was starting to figure out how sick I had actually been from birth. I was born into this world with chronic fatigue and autoimmune stuff going on. And I always knew that something wasn't right. But it was really around this period of life when Kambo came into the picture that I was starting to clue in and acknowledge that, it wasn't normal to sleep 13 hours a day and feel exhausted all the time as someone in my early 20s. And it was Kambo kind of coming into my life and accidentally healing me. That was started to give me contrast. It started to increase my baseline vitality and reduce my pain and improve my energy. And it was within that contrast that I was able to fully acknowledge and recognize that I had been very ill for my whole life. And I just didn't know because my baseline was all that I knew, right? So later I then discovered I had lupus and Lyme disease and PTSD and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and mast cell activation, mold exposure, all the things that kind of snowball together.
All the greatest hits.
Yeah, all the things that like to hang out together. And Kambo really was, at that time, the most powerful tool offering relief, offering clarity, not just in my physiological health, but also in my spiritual and expansive, well-being, where I could really understand how the psychosomatic aspect of my past had really trickled down into my physiology and manifested this very real physical illness, likely from, originating in the nervous system and the emotional body. So that was all kind of how it came into my life. And then honestly, Kambo just took a hold of me and it spiraled out of control in the most beautiful way and just took control of my life. And I'm blessed to be in partnership with it now.
What was the setting for your first experience? What were you in a room? Were you outside? How many doses did you have? Did you do a number of them over the course of a few days? Tell me about the details, because many people listening are like, what are you guys even talking about? We'll get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So funny enough, I showed up at this was in like Desert Springs, like Palm Springs area. And it was a pretty beat up neighborhood. It looked like there was probably a lot of drugs and stuff and poverty. And then in the middle of this kind of, broken down neighborhood was this beautiful house with like neon colored hummingbird art and just beauty. It just like stuck out like a jewel. And I go in and it turns out I actually knew these medicine women. They're a couple, and I had been friends with their son, and they had made the first, DMT I'd ever smoked. So there was already a very strange synchronicity showing up and realizing that I knew these people. They have really wonderful intentions, but again, this was not a time where anyone knew anything about Kambo. So, they did serve in a way that I would definitely not endorse now. There was no real safety protocols that we've come to understand are important now. So it was a bit, Wild West. It was in their living room. There was probably, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 people there total. We all kind of hung out on the couch and then would be called up one by one. And there was no test point or anything. They just slapped on 3 points. And they give you about 5 minutes, to kind of purge it out. And then they send you back to the couch where you continue purging on your own, which again, looking back, I'm like, that's not how I would have organized the ceremony. But I think people just, they just didn't know any different. And yeah, one thing they also did was tell me to drink a profuse amount of water, which is also a big no-no. And I think I arrived to this ceremony probably borderline hyponatremia already, having drank like probably 6 liters of water in the hours leading up to the ceremony, which is, very dangerous. And we can talk more about that later. But it wasn't an emotionally safe space. It did feel held in that way. But yeah, just as far as the awareness around safety protocols was completely absent. And, it's an evolving practice in the West, and it's becoming adapted now to meet the needs of Westerners. So we need to also educate people and raise the standard of how this medicine is utilized.
Beautiful. So that was in 2015?
Yeah.
That's funny. That's the year that I first sat with it too. Sounds like a similar situation. The one thing I remember about it was my friend who brought me, rest in peace, David Solomini, since has passed away. But he brought me, and the whole plan was to go 3 days in a row and do it 3 times. And at that point, I had not sat with plant medicines or anything in any intentional way, just reckless youth psychedelics, but hadn't really been on my path at that point. So, and I was sober at the time, well, still am. So, I knew that it wasn't psychoactive, but I knew it was kind of in the shamanic plant medicine, indigenous medicine realm. So I double checked on that. I said, nope, you don't get high or anything. And we're supposed to go 3 times. After, the hour or whatever it took, I was like, hell no, I'm not going back. And I haven't done it since.
Oh.
And I've done a lot of other things that were probably much more uncomfortable and longer lasting since then. But one thing I did notice about it for sure was this like diamond mind clarity that lasted for probably about a week. I remember driving around LA and I felt like I was in a video game. Like my mind was so clear and so focused. I thought, man, I wish you could get that without having, is there just a pill you could take without having to go through the whole thing? But yeah, it was, it definitely left a mark, and also opened me to, other realms that have been very supportive. So for people that are new to the topic, give us the breakdown on, we can talk a bit about the history, but just, what is this frog medicine, and how you get it in your body. I think that's the thing that's probably off-putting to some people because it involves burning your skin and all the things. But give us the 101 on it, and then we can get into the weeds.
Yeah, the quick and dirty. So Kambo is an Amazonian medicine that comes from the skin secretion of a very specific species of tree frog called Medusa bicolor. And traditionally, this medicine was applied through, transdermal application, very superficial burns made on the skin, usually the upper arm or the leg, but, you really can apply to most areas of the body. And once the secretion is applied to the burn, it goes very rapidly into the system through the lymphatic system. And there are dozens of bioactive peptide molecules in the secretion, and they produce an array of really potent effects on your physiology. So you're probably going to feel your heart beating faster and harder. You might get a hot flushing sensation or vibrational tingling sensations in the fingers. Mucus getting kind of excreted out of the eyes and nose. Sweating is normal. Shaking is normal. General kind of malaise or fatigue is normal. And facial swelling is also a really common feature of Kambo, which is important that people know, because if the practitioner doesn't tell people, they can panic and think they're having an anaphylactic, like allergic reaction, and that's not the case. It's quite safe and okay. And then nausea, vomiting, are keystones of the experience. And, people can also release through having bowel movements. Fainting is also possible and fairly common. So yeah, it produces this really potent, quite uncomfortable experience for about 20 to 30 minutes. And, despite the sort of like outward violence of Kambo, it actually is very safe on a physical level. The peptides really display little to no toxicity to mammalian or human cells. The LD50 is very, very, very high, at least in rats. So even though it looks quite intense, this is a practice that has been going on for at least hundreds of years, if not longer, and has really, consistently shown that if you take simple measures, it's a very safe process for someone to go through.
And this medicine comes from these frogs, and from what I understand, it's an excretion that comes out of their skin that I'm assuming they use as a self-defense for things trying to eat them.
Yeah, definitely. So it's used, against predation, but actually primarily what they really utilize it for is, I think, antimicrobial protection. So there's a bunch of species of frogs right now that are kind of getting taken out by these, chitinous fungal infections. And the Medusa bicolor frogs don't seem to have that issue. Their populations are in good standing because they just don't fall susceptible to pathogens, because part of the features of some of these peptides is that they're antimicrobial, antifungal. So they kind of use it to, rub and distribute all over their body and keep them healthy from pathogens.
What a trip. Two things that I think are so bizarre about this world is the Kambo frog and the Bufo alvarius toad. I just think nature is so funny. The creator is so funny how it tucks these very unique and potent medicines away in places where you'd really have to look to find it as a human. So I always think about, you can think about like mushrooms, right? It's not that hard to deduce. Someone was hungry at some point and was like, oh, I'll eat some of this mushroom. And next thing you know, they're having some sort of mystical experience. But when it comes to Kambo and Bufo, both, I always wonder, like, who was the first person that's like, hey, let's try burning our skin, or, let's try smoking this venom. It's just such a funny, those two discoveries to me are really hilarious in that way. Especially with
Totally.
Bufo. I mean, it's like you have the key to consciousness found in one place, This is so bizarre.
It makes you really wonder what else is out there, right? I mean, there's so many animal toxins, just as an example of that category, so many animal venoms and secretions that have totally been not explored at all. And yeah, it makes you really wonder what else is out there. And maybe we should be conservative with, our natural environment, because it's probably full of medicine.
Who were the first people on record to work with Kambo?
Yeah, that is an interesting piece of the puzzle that I continue to try to get down to the bottom of. It depends on who you ask. And, most of my indigenous relations are with the Matses, who are probably the more popularly known for their use of Kambo, but they were likely not the original users. Recently, I kind of got some word from a Matses elder about a story that this tribe called the Marubo were perhaps the original holders of this medicine. And then they kind of taught a lot of the neighboring tribes, like the Nokikoi, also known as the Katukina, and the Hunikuin, Yawanawa, and these sort of other neighboring groups that shared the space with them. But there's not really concrete documentation of the origins of Kambo. And it's something, that was really passed down through word of mouth. And I try to ask as many, indigenous elders as I can, but it's tricky because you can literally ask the same individual year after year the same question and you get different answers. And it's hard to say if that's because they're a bit secretive about their origins, or they have shifting beliefs, or perhaps sometimes there are commercial interests at hand. They want to steer a narrative. So it can be really hard to know what's really true around the historical context of Kambo.
What does collecting the medicine look like for the people who go and retrieve these frogs? Are they having to climb trees, and is it difficult to catch them, or do you just go down to the creek and like, oh, there's a couple, just swoop them up?
It's quite difficult. And, when you see what it takes to harvest this medicine in the wild, it really helps you appreciate how precious it is and what a privilege it is. Typically, you go out in the night, depends. The frogs can be active at different times, but sometimes they're active at like 3 a.m, so you like wake up in the middle of the night, you go out, you call to them, you listen for their response calls so that you can locate them. You figure out what tree they're in. And watching an indigenous person scale a 40-foot tree in the middle of the night, there can be vipers, there's mosquitoes everywhere. They're barefoot and they climb up there. They find this frog. They'll kind of pick off the branch so that they don't disturb the frog at all, and then climb down while holding this frog. Like maybe the branch is in their mouth and they're like carefully climbing down. And sometimes you catch the frog and there's no secretion there for you to even receive.
Oh, for real? Some of the frogs are duds?
Well, yeah, because like they need time to
That's
regenerate their secretion. So whether they were harvested from already or they actually had to utilize it for a defense, they don't always have it. And that really helps you recognize that like, oh, this is not something to take for granted. It's dangerous to climb up in the middle of the night. And what you get, you might not find a frog that has anything to offer. And even if you do, you still need to leave that frog with some left to defend itself, right? If you want to do ethical, sustainable harvesting practices. So once they bring the frog down, there are different methods of the actual collection. I think most of the traditional way involves the crucifixion. You've probably seen photos, and they do gently tie the frog's, ankles and wrists and spread it out. The frogs look like they're being stretched like a rubber band, but they're really not. They're just super lanky. So if you extend their arms, it looks like you're, kind of pulling them tight. And then, there is a certain amount of stress required to get the frog to secrete, right? It has to feel agitated and distressed in some capacity. Otherwise, it won't, release it. And sometimes I've seen where they're almost too gentle with the frog, and the frog is like so chill, and it's not really releasing anything because it doesn't feel in danger in any way. So you got to find the balance between not, you have to stress it a little bit, but you don't want to be cruel or inhumane. And usually this, they scrape off the sweat from its back and put it on like a bamboo pallet, some sort of wooden pallet. And, or you can actually just take it fresh from the frog and apply it to a burn. I've seen certain groups literally take a frog and rub it on the burn, which looks a little uncomfortable for the frog. It's like a bar of soap, Wow. Some people don't tie the frog. They'll actually just kind of hold it and scrape off. But, it does seep into your skin. When you're touching the frog, you can feel, it kind of has a minor effect. It'll soak through. So you do want to make sure not to touch your eyes or anything like that, or else it'll sting.
And it's technically a poison, not a venom, right?
Yeah, from an ecological perspective, yeah, definitely.
And what happens what would happen if one were to just eat some of it? Would you die, get sick?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I haven't had the balls to find out myself. I'm normally pretty self-experimental.
I would say that might be intelligence, but
I've heard some stories of people doing that. And feeling like really sick for like 2 weeks. I don't know how true any of that is. When I think about it from just like a biochemical perspective, I imagine that your stomach acid would just destroy these peptides almost immediately. They're quite fragile, and they're very rapidly degraded by trypsin and other enzymes, proteases. So I don't know. I've definitely have administered to animals before, like on their gums, and they swallow it, and there doesn't seem to be any
interesting
effect, because I'm trying to get it in the mucous membranes on their gums, but they will swallow it because they're an animal. You can't really fish it out of there. So I don't know is the, long answer short. I don't know. There are alternative ways that you can administer Kambo. There are nasal administration routes and rectal. I don't recommend rectal, but again, with animals, I have utilized rectal because I don't want to burn an animal,
Yeah, because they don't have the cognition to understand what's going on. So it's tantamount to torture for an animal, right? Like if I burned my dog Cookie with a stick, she would probably be... her feelings would be hurt, to say the least.
It's just not necessary.
So you've treated like pets, though?
I have, yeah, a few different species of animals.
Really?
Yeah, almost always in like fairly dire circumstances, where it was a risk, but it was a calculated one, and ended up faring really well for most of the animals.
Wow. How many humans have you served?
I think at this point, over 2,700 sessions over the last 10 years. Yeah.
Oh my God. What's the strongest, most memorable reaction you've ever seen?
There are too many. There are too many. And when you say strong, strong isn't necessarily a good thing. If someone's having a noticeably strong experience, I might feel like, okay, this is too much for them, right? What I have seen is a lot of damn near miraculous outcomes that continue to just blow my mind, like it doesn't get old. This medicine continues to keep me on my toes, continues to humble me and surprise me with the potency that it offers. I've seen people who have gone years without being able to take a poop on their own. They're doing daily enemas in order to have, any sort of bowel movements. And they do Kambo one time. And the next day they start pooping, and they poop normally after that.
Wow.
Yeah, things like that. I've seen it work really incredibly for chronic pain, for smoking cessation. I've seen it work for cancer. I've also seen it not work for cancer. So I think it very much depends also on the type of cancer and the context, right? There's a lot, there. It seems to work really well for managing autoimmune conditions and especially infections, chronic infections, acute infections. I have saved myself from so many rounds of antibiotics by carrying a Kambo stick with me all over the world. I've been in Sumatra with bladder infections. I've been in, Malaysia with like horrible gut bugs. I've had motorbike accidents in the tropics where, my wounds are getting infected, or I get tattoo work and they're getting infected. And a little bit of Kambo is rapidly effective for helping probably boost immune function more than have direct antimicrobial effects. But whatever it is, there is definitely an immunogenic aspect. And I also served a lot of people during the virus that shall not be named era. I was running all over the island that I live on, actively serving people microdoses of Kambo with, active COVID, and it was just terminating it instantaneously. So it is a very versatile and powerful tool.
You're making me want to do it. After that first one, I was like, never again. But, there's certain things that are difficult to get to, difficult to treat, Like I was talking to you about tinnitus before we recorded, and it's just like everyone kind of throws their hands up, like, I got nothing for that. So I always think about people that have sort of seemingly incurable or hard to identify issues, and I've heard from other people, also practitioners, just the endless miracles they see. It's just incredible. I'm just like, man, why can't they do it in a way that's really comfortable?
But the thing is, they can.
Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. And you correct me where I'm wrong, but running in spaces with people who are working with plant medicines and things like that, it seems like kind of like podcasting. Everyone and their mom's doing it. It's like every other person I meet, it's like, I serve Kambo. I'm like, really? Everyone?
Yeah.
But there's this thing that's like, what's the word people use? Like how many points you did. There seems to be kind of like with anything, there's some sort of ego identification or machismo about like how much Kambo you did. And I've talked to practitioners who I think are maybe in the game a little bit longer, more experienced, and they speak more like the word you mentioned, microdose. They're like, dude, you have to assess each individual person and kind of base the dose on that. It's not about like, how many points can you handle kind of thing. So talk to us about dosing and the ethics around that, for people that don't have the opportunity to work with you and might be interested in this, or even someone who's maybe had a less than positive experience, they might be able to ascertain why it was more challenging than maybe it needed to be to get the desired effect.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. And yeah, it is removing the ego and actually helping people access healing through softness. I think there's already this pervasive theme in society or programming where people believe that they have to suffer to deserve their healing, or, they have to work hard and it has to be painful for you to justify your existence, right? It's like this bigger theme in our global economy. And that's something that I really aim to kind of rewire as a concept for people, because it really is in the yin and the softness where people have the greatest breakthroughs, at least from my experience. And there's so many people like you that, did Kambo one time or whatever with someone who may have not been the most attuned or experienced or educated on how to use that medicine. And they are traumatized. And this medicine is really powerful. It can absolutely traumatize people, and it can hurt people if used incorrectly. And like you said, everyone and their mom is now identifying as a practitioner. There's been an explosion of these sort of weekend warrior training certifications, and people just don't know what they don't know. And even though they have maybe the best of intentions, when they go through a 3-day certification program, they come out believing that they're qualified, and then they hurt people or they traumatize people, or at best, they don't help people really extract as much meaning and like juicy benefit as they could because they lack the skills and the mastery to do so. So dosing really plays into that in a significant way. I kind of am like at the opposite end of the spectrum, where I feel like bragging about how little medicine I can use to help people catalyze an effective experience for them. I really think that consciousness medicine is probably the primary tool that we should be using. And then these medicines, like Kambo or psychedelics or whatever, can then provide some of the like physiological rocket fuel to augment the openness and the plasticity for your consciousness to really intentionally rewrite the narrative. But if that part is not supported, or if the practitioner does not know to guide someone into finding their power in utilizing consciousness medicine, they're missing a really great opportunity. Kambo does a lot on its own, but when you actually navigate with intentionality and with direction, it is like rocket fuel, like I said. And that's the thing that I see missing, is like people are lazy and they're wanting the Kambo to do all the work, when really you need to be expertly curating the context of that person's experience, the environment, and helping them derive meaning from the experience using consciousness, using intentionality, because that's actually what helps people integrate the experience and change their lives. The effects of Kambo, they last, maybe a week or so, where you can feel the physiological differences. But then what? Then you kind of go back to your life. And just like with psychedelics, there's this big theme around integration. So looping back to dosage, because I can get on these kind of, soap opera, whatever.
We got plenty of time.
It turns out when people feel safe, grounded, prepared, they have informed consent, and you guide them into the ceremonial space so that they can really drop into a parasympathetic response before they go into the Kambo, the potency of the medicine is actually different. And this makes sense, right? If you're in a stress response, you're not sure if you feel safe with the practitioner, maybe there's 20 people in the room, nobody seems to be watching or supervising any of them, and you get 10 points slapped on you for your first time without a test point or anything, you are going to contract. You're going to be in vigilant survival mode, and you're just going to be hanging on for dear life until you make it to the other side. You're going to be in a sympathetic stress response state. If you are running from a lion and you're having this stress response, your physiology is going to tell you, now is not the time to vomit. We do not have 30 seconds to pull over and puke in the bushes. The lion is chasing us, right? And so what actually happens when people don't feel safe, whether it's conscious or unconscious, they block the effects of the medicine, and they can't actually allow it to go in and do its thing. So if you know how to expertly guide someone into a state of relaxation and safety and vulnerability, you don't need to use very much medicine. So many times in my practice, I'm putting, probably 40% of the time, I'm putting 1 point on people.
Really?
And they're having full purgative experiences.
Wow.
They're having breakthroughs, more so than if you slam them with like 6 points off the rip. Because then, like I said, they're just going to go into survival mode, and they are going to block themselves from actually receiving the intelligent gifts from the medicine. So I'm very much all about, minimal effective dose, low and slow. And, I'm not here to cheap out on anybody. If anyone ever wants more, I am so happy to give them more, but they never do, right? Like once you're in it, and you're having a full breakthrough experience, it's really up to you here how you want to navigate that. And just because it's more painful for you does not necessarily mean that you're going to get more out of it. In fact, I like to really teach people that, we want the experience to be manageable so that you can actually use it like a weight, like a barbell, where you're training your nervous system to be able to induce a parasympathetic surrender response or whatever in the face of challenge and uncomfortability. Because if you can do that and you can actually develop that as a skill, life is going to be so much better, right? Because life is full of hard shit, of painful stuff. So that's where the integration comes in. If you can practice and develop those skills with tools like Kambo and Sananga and Rape that kind of all, are used together, and then take that and apply that to your life, these are the gifts that Kambo can bring, amongst other things. But that's the way I like to guide people so that they can actually go out into the world and live a better life.
All right, listen up. If you're over 35, congratulations. You are officially an adult. You can even run for president, although I don't recommend it. Here's something way more important to note. Your enzyme levels have already started declining, whether you eat clean or not. And enzymes are what break down food into usable protein, fats, carbs, and micronutrients. So if you're noticing a little more bloating, less energy, or you're walking away from meals feeling heavy instead of refueled, it's probably because your digestion just isn't what it used to be. And this, you guys, is why I take Masszymes from Bioptimizers religiously. I'm talking every meal. Masszymes delivers a full spectrum of enzymes, including significantly more protease than other brands. And that really matters because protein is the hardest macronutrient for the body to break down and the one you need more of as you age. Masszymes has become part of my daily ritual for optimized digestion. I take 2 capsules with my biggest meal of the day, and I never feel like I need to recover from eating. Plus, I'm not thinking about food a couple hours later because my body actually got what it needed from what I ate. So to get everything out of the food you eat, head over to bioptimizers.com/Luke and use the code Luke15 to save 15%. If you want to make your meals pay you back in real nutrition, Masszymes is the way to do it. Again, hit up bioptimizers.com/Luke. I really like your perspective here in so many ways. A being the body is not going to go into healing if it's sympathetic and in a fight or flight kind of scenario, which kind of brings me back to that first experience I had where a lot of people were really, really struggling and kind of freaking out. Luckily, I think I'd been meditating for a very long time by that time. So I don't even know, I don't remember if the practitioner suggested this, but I remember just breathing slowly and keeping myself as calm as possible. And I treated the experience like a meditation. It was like, okay, how present can I be with something really uncomfortable without resisting? And I did, and I actually don't think I purged, but as it started to wear off, I purged out the backside violently. But I remember just, can I be present with this? Because I really wanted to have the full experience. And to your point of building that kind of resilience for integration, meaning living your life out there. This is why I do ice baths all the time. I mean, like many times a day. It's hot as shit in Texas a lot of the time, but my practice has always been, how quickly can I just totally relax and surrender to that moment? And I don't have any science to back this up, but it takes a lot to get me riled up. I mean, something can happen that's unexpected, and I'm pretty decent at keeping my composure and kind of assessing things without panicking. So I really like that approach to this particular medicine because it just makes so much common logical sense, right? If you're having a lot of resistance and your body's freaking out and you're unable to have Well, I guess in your case, you would be assisting someone to be in that place where they can have agency, right? Like, wow, I'm sweating, I'm really uncomfortable, my face is puffing up. How can I surrender to this experience and allow the medicine to work its magic without me interfering because of my reaction to it?
Yeah, 100%. And, a lot of people who practice Kambo, ongoing for years, maybe they're actually serving people. I think you arrive at a place where when you take Kambo, you no longer suffer. You just get the hell out of the way. You know what it is. You trust it. You know that it's okay. And you do it and you just allow the experience to happen and being present with it and observing the sensations. And one of the things I love about Kambo is that it's an amazing tool for embodiment, especially in a world where, psychedelic fireworks are often celebrated and chased after. People want these really intense, exciting, novel, trippy experiences, which have their place. Don't get me wrong. I love a good, good visual. But with Kambo, it's like it pulls you so into your body that you have no choice but to confront the humanness of the sensations. And that alone is so much potential medicine for people, for them to really open up and invite that in and find ways of harmonizing with the intensity and the sensations of being in their body. And that's, I think, part of why some people don't like it, because it really puts it right here. And it's like a Chinese finger trap, like the harder you pull, the tighter it gets. And the only way through Kambo is through softness and through surrendering. And it's a bit counterintuitive, but once that clicks and then you develop it, you're like, wow, what else can I do this with and make it easier?
How often do you administer it to yourself or have someone do it to you? Is it something you do on a seasonal or regular basis at this point after serving gazillions of people?
It's changed over the years. And I think the most important thing is to listen to where your needs are at with the medicine and to not just take them out of some sort of expectation or schedule, right? When I was, really ill, I took Kambo a lot more. When I first started with it, I was probably using it once a month or so. And then I was getting healthier and healthier, and I found that I was able to go longer and longer without it. So then it kind of became once every 8 weeks, and then once every, 12 weeks, and then maybe a couple times a year. These days, I actually don't use it a ton. Probably, I go to the jungle once a year, and when I'm in the jungle, you just do it every day. So I might do it like 5 times in like a week or something.
Really?
Yeah, just because, when in the jungle, that's what you're there to do. But during the rest of the year, like maybe 2, max 3 times, I use microdosing a lot more at this point, and really as more of like an antibiotic intervention than anything. Especially living in the tropics, there's all sorts of pathogens trying to get you all the time. So I mostly use microdosing. And on the subject of like softness and like yen, microdosing is so great. It's like easy. There's no nausea or purging involved. It still produces some degree of physical effects. Like you'll still get some heart beating and some heat flushing, but it's quite blissful actually. And as long as you keep it below that kind of purgative threshold, it's really easy. It doesn't wipe you out for the rest of the day. You don't have to fast for 8 hours. You can just move on with your day. It gives you energy. And it knocks out infections like instantly. So that's kind of more where I'm at these days, is like staying connected through really low doses and then using a full purgative dose if I need it. But I seldom need it at this point.
You fixed your shit. You worked it out.
Well, I mean, to some extent, but also bodies change, right, over time. And there's other tools that I'm finding really supportive right now, and doing a lot of other injectable peptides and high dose vitamin C and things like that. And yeah, I just feel like there are seasons to any person's growth and journey in their wellness.
Is the Kambo excretion standardized? Meaning, can you always determine how much of the actives are present? Meaning, for example, with the bufo toad excretion, I've experienced this myself, and it's been pretty jarring where, you have a measurement, say, on a scale of a certain milligram, and then you take a dose and it's what you expect, and then the same exact measurement could have less or more of the actives in it, and all of a sudden you're getting much more than you bargained for. Are you able to predict, the measurements in a way, or is it variable because it's coming from nature and not a lab?
It is extremely variable. I mean, I think any natural substance there's so many contingencies, even in plants, right? Yeah, I've been trying to find an objective answer to this. For the last 5 years, I have diligently been trying to get some proteomic analysis on a number of sticks, and I have sadly failed over and over and over for a number of reasons. Like the samples get stolen in a backpack in Peru, or then I get new samples and they're contaminated. Or, okay, these samples work, but now they need the frog's DNA, and then I find frog eggs, and then, or we run the mass spec and it didn't work, or it's just been an ongoing thing. What I do know, there have been very few papers published that have actually kind of assayed the constituents of sticks. And I'm familiar with 2 papers, and the ingredients on those sticks of the 2 papers are nothing near similar to each other. So based on that and kind of observing sessions, there is so much variation in the constituents of the secretion likely. And, that makes sense. Frogs are individuals like you and I. They are different ages. They're different sexes. There's different seasons of the year. They live in different environments where maybe there's more or less abundance of food or population or human interaction or harvesting or whatever. So it doesn't surprise me. But yeah, there really isn't any sort of standardization at this point. And that is something that I would like to push science forward in understanding, because then it actually opens up the ability to consider creating a synthetic analog that can take pressure off of, naturally derived Kambo, perhaps resolving some of the sustainability concerns, but also, if somebody wanted, could potentially take it through drug development and make it an FDA approved medicine, which might give more people access to healing that otherwise wouldn't choose to do frog poison, right?
Yeah, it's probably not going to go mainstream anytime soon.
No, and there's a lot of challenges.
Iteration.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't even really have hardly any human research at this point. I'm aware of, 2 studies that have been published that are involving humans. One of them is one of my studies. Another is just a survey of people that took Kambo at any point. And then I just finished conducting the first prospective human study on Kambo, where we administered psychometric scales before, after, and then 3 months after follow-up. And the results were really profound, actually, massive drops in depression symptomology, significant increases in mindfulness scores, life satisfaction, things like that. We also found that concurrent use of Sananga and Rape with the Kambo also enhanced positive psychological outcomes. So right now I'm trying to get that study published. For the last 9 months, I have been grinding, trying to get a journal to look past the taboo nature of it and appreciate our bulletproof statistical analysis. But it is hard because the stigma is alive and real in the scientific community, shockingly so, because I thought, we're all scientists. We're trained to think, as unbiasedly as possible because we're supposed to be truth seekers. And turns out that's not actually the case for everybody, apparently. And I've been shocked by some of the, weird responses I've gotten from journals around, even just trying to publish a literature review It's like all this is already published. I'm just compiling it into a different version, and it's still, they feel it's controversial. And I'm like, it's just fact. Like these peptides have been found in this thing. Like there's nothing that, controversial about it. But I've had journals be total hostile to me, attack me, say really bizarre things, say, oh, you guys just want to get high. And I'm like, did you even read the paper? That's like in the first paragraph, you don't get high. So yeah, trying to push forward Kambo science is hard. And, it'd probably be easier with more support, but sometimes you just have to do something. If you want it done, you have to do it yourself. Because I'm looking around like, who's going to do this? Nobody. Crickets. So I'm like, okay, I'll find a way to do it. And, this last study that we're this close to publishing, it was funded by some random crypto millionaire that I served Kambo to in Bali.
Really?
Who was, he had this philanthropic sort of agenda, and he wanted to donate to projects where he felt like his money could actually really accelerate a field. So he gave me, more than 6 figures of funding to make this study happen. No strings attached, like really no agenda other than to just support the progress of these type of, research that can hopefully help humanity. So it's been a blessed journey, but man, if anyone is listening and you want to, you have an institution that wants to get in on this, please. We just started a nonprofit a few months ago, so it's brand new. It's called the Institute of Kambo Advancement and Preservation. And part of our initiatives is to have, support in funding ongoing research that can be more sophisticated, can be, more controlled, as well as conservation initiatives, sustainability research studies, harm reduction education, things like that. Those are all in the wheelhouse of things that we feel are important as this medicine grows and expands in the awareness of society.
Well, we're going to put links to everything you do at lukestore.com/kambo, KMBO. And we'll get to some more of that later. But it sounds like with this particular medicine, people involved have to be incentivized just for the greater good and caring about humanity, right? If you're getting this kind of resistance from the scientific community or indifference or lack of interest, obviously there's probably not a lot of money to be made in something like this that can't be patented because God made it. I mean, I can see why you would have difficulty moving forward for a number of reasons, but I really like this. The wealthy guy comes in and says, man, I have a positive experience here. I want to get this information out, and has the resources to do that. I think that's one of the most positive things about these kind of sacred medicines, whether they're psychedelic or not, is people that are resourced and influential having life-changing experiences and going like, why doesn't everyone know about this? I know a lot of practitioners that work with wealthy people and charge a lot of money for their services, which I at first thought was a little shady. Think of 2 people specifically that I had positive experiences with. And I'm like, how much do you charge? And they're like, I'm not trying to make money. I'm trying to get to the heads of corporations, the heads of state. They're going for like a top-down impact, right, to get people to become invested because they have positive experiences rather than, solely focusing on the people in need that aren't resourced. So it's an interesting kind of vertical there. I don't think there's a right or wrong way, but I'm starting to see that there's some value in reaching influential people that can actually help the cause solely out of the kindness of their heart and the fact that they want to help their fellow humans.
Yeah, we need that. And whether you like money or not, it is what makes the world run. And it's much better for someone who has good intentions and wants to create something of value for the world to be resourced. And so, yeah, I don't judge anyone for charging what they need, so that they can support others in, their modality.
All right, you guys, I don't love the term biohacker, but let's say I've been in the health optimization game for a minute. I'm basically obsessed with solutions to what ails us. So supplements, cold plunges, red light, all the things, right? But if you're not managing the energetic field in which you live, even the best inputs like those don't land the way you think they do. Because unfortunately, these days our bodies are constantly interacting with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell towers, an invisible load your nervous system has to process 24/7. This is why you can be doing everything right and still feel a little off. And that's exactly what got me into Lila Quantum Tech. It's a suite of products designed to support your biofield and help your body stay resilient to EMF stress. At home, I use their Quantum Block to harmonize the environment here in my office studio and support a more coherent signal all around me. Then when I leave the compound here, I wear the Heal 360 capsule. It's got quantum-charged titanium spheres inside it, so it helps take the edge off that constant background noise when I'm out in the world. And when the exposure peaks, times like air travel, traffic, and so on, they've got EMF blocking clothing that blocks against 99% of measurable wireless radiation. This line of clothing is clutch when you're walking into a high EMF environment. To get yourself dialed in with all that stuff, here's what you do. Go to lukestory.com/LilaQ and use the code Luke10 for 10% off your first order. That's lukestory.com/LEELAQ. Because the real upgrade isn't doing tons more supplements and saunas and all the things. It's about protecting the field in which you live and thrive. Again, that link is lukestory.com/LilaQ and the code is Luke10. What's up with the conservation? Are there any issues with extinction or environmental impacts or negative impacts to the cultures where these medicines originate? I know that's an issue with the bufo toad. You know, you have people out there trying to make a buck and decimating the desert toad to sell the venom when you could just use synthetic, you know?
Yeah, totally. So currently the frogs are non-threatened, which is great. Their populations are abundant. You know, they don't really have a lot of predators. You know, word on the block is you don't eat that frog.
Right.
So luckily their populations are good for now. But as someone who's on the ground in the jungle year after year, I am seeing changes to the population. And you know, over-harvesting is a concern that I have, especially as it continues to grow in interest. And like you said, the indigenous have, you know, started using harvesting of Kambo to support their livelihoods because they have no choice but to integrate with a modernizing world where money is involved, right? So you are finding areas that are being heavily harvested from. The frogs are declining in their health. And while this isn't affecting, you know, the larger population of the entire Amazon basin, because many of the frogs are probably so deep in the Amazon that most people can't access them. But on like, you know, the outskirts of like Iquitos and places like that, there's people going up and down the river with boats, just squeezing as much out of these frogs as they can to make a buck. And yeah, there's a few different things going on there. One, I think this is the time, earlier rather than later, to start initiatives with conservation and sustainability. Because if we don't even have a baseline of what a healthy population should be, how can we even know what our goal should be? So again, that's something that we're trying to kind of pioneer is let's start getting some, you know, conservation and sustainability initiatives on the ground and actually empower the indigenous by having them run these projects, having them have other sources of income and support so they don't have to just solely rely on harvesting of the medicines. You know, it's also why I take groups to the jungle too, is so that people can not only see with their own eyes where this medicine comes from and what it's really like in these communities, but that we can actually bring them resources that don't rely on them just, you know, stripping all the frogs from the jungle, and they can actually get paid to provide an experiential process for people instead. So these are concerns that I have. I think that they should be addressed earlier rather than later. And I also am seeing, these cultural changes happening rapidly in these indigenous communities, which, it's a complicated topic because on one hand, when you come into an indigenous community, especially as a white person, you don't really have much right to say, how they're going to live their life. So if you do come in and bring them resources, I don't feel it's really up to you to tell them how to allocate their resources. Like, they get to decide what their community wants. And sometimes it's Starlink, and sometimes it's, solar power, and sometimes it's iPhones. And, part of you might not want that to happen. You want them to preserve their culture and their way of life, because to you on the outside, it's like interesting and feels connected to nature. And it is. But, you're not the one living that life every day. And not having internet, and not having electricity, and not having a bed to sleep on, and no medical care or whatever. So it can be very delicate to engage with these indigenous communities as they start to get more access to the modern comforts, because the human condition will always want more than what it has, right? That's how we survive as humans. We have this dopaminergic quality that leaves us yearning for more than what we have. And that, I don't know if that will ever change, no matter who you are or where you live. So yeah, I just, working with some of these villages and seeing, like shitting in a hole in the ground and having bats fly out of it and stuff, and going to like them having these buildings with like toilets and tile floors and solar showers, and you're just like, wow. Or getting the Starlink. Now everybody's playing games on their phones. They're not as engaged. Even just the kids, when I first started going there, the kids hardly spoke any Spanish, and now the kids are fluent in Spanish, which is kind of cool because I can communicate more effectively with them now. But yeah, it's an interesting experience, like watching the, interaction with indigenous communities around all these medicines, not just Kambo, how it inevitably shapes their offerings, the way they engage, even the stories they tell about their medicines. Because I've also seen those change, which makes me believe that maybe there's a bit of commercial fabrication going on as well to kind of, I don't know, create like a story that feels emotional for people and then makes them want to give more money or whatever. So that's definitely a reality, and it's something I talk about a lot, and it's something I like to help people understand the complexities of, because there is a lot of romanticization of indigenous practices without a full conceptual understanding of like, what is life actually like for an indigenous person in their villages?
Speaking of romanticizing, I think in the West in general, we have, when it comes to rituals and ceremony, I think sometimes we have a bit of a romantic fantasy vision of how those things play out in those cultures. Yeah. Right. I've heard stories from people going down to the Amazon or whatever and drinking ayahuasca, and they're expecting things to have this elaborate production and so on. And it's just, you're just sitting in a shed with some guy, and he's the shaman, and he's just wearing like an Old Navy shirt. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles that we might imagine. What have you learned about the level of, intentionality, ritual, ceremony specific to Kambo? Is it something that is very elaborate and well thought out and practiced, or is it just kind of like, this is what we do, it's not a big deal, here, take a little burn? Or is it, I'm sure it's a spectrum depending on who you're working with, but what is the kind of Western perspective? How does it differ from how people are working with Kambo in its place of origin?
Yeah, so in the jungle, with most communities that use Kambo, there is little to no ritual or spirituality. There's no shamanic history with Kambo at all. That's something that I think all the ayahuasca people have just kind of blanket applied to Kambo.
Okay.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a shaman to administer Kambo in these communities. There's no songs most of the time. Some places they'll sing songs, but I think that was a newer adaptation because the gringos like the songs, right? But I don't think they typically sing songs. There's definitely no intention setting. There's no prayers. There's no safety protocols. No one asks you if you have any contraindications. Like, you're just sitting on a log puking on your feet, puking on your neighbor's feet, and no one's really there to even like help you. Sometimes they might kind of hold you up if they think you're about to faint, but it's very casual, and I kind of like it. It's something, right? It's its own thing, and it has its own energy of being in the jungle, in the environment, and doing fresh from the frog. It's a whole experience. But with the modernization of Kambo in the West, there has been this like neo-spiritual adaptation to it, which I actually really like. And I am not at all a traditionalist in any sense. I despise dogma. I think that innovation is our friend, and I think discernment is important. We need to look at the parts of, historical use that make sense and ask, like, does this apply to the needs of the community that's taking it in this context? And sometimes it doesn't. One example is whether to use saliva or water to reconstitute the secretion. People that are, very, traditionalists, they'll say, oh, well, the indigenous people use saliva. I'm like, that's because they don't have access to clean water. Like compared to the amoeba-laden river water, their saliva probably is a better choice. But when we have access to purified water and we're working professionally in a, first world country, and we don't want to be rubbing our spit into someone's open wound, we can use water, right? And, there's all these dogmatic ideas about whether you don't transmit the energy of the practitioner, etc. I don't find any of that to be true personally. So there's things like that I think we really need to question. And I am a fan of the ceremonialization that I've seen happen with Kambo because I think it is an evolving way of using Kambo. And, I personally don't believe that Kambo belongs to the indigenous people of the Amazon. I believe it belongs to the frog. And I do think the frog has its own agenda, has its own desires, and it has left the jungle for a reason. And I think it wants to move into broader parts of the world and do whatever its mission is. And I think it's okay that things change, that things get updated to be relevant to, what's needed by the people that are using Kambo. People in the Amazon didn't use Kambo for their childhood trauma or aligning their chakras or any of that. They primarily used it for magic, actually. They didn't even use it so much as a medicine. It was for magic. It was for increasing their hunting abilities, for improving their visual acuity, their perceptual abilities, their endurance. It was like an adaptogen in some ways for them. And then on occasion, if you start to feel a bit sluggish, you got that panema. It's like that dark energy, kind of groggy cloud of bad luck. Then they'll give you Kambo. Or if you have malaria or, a gut bug or something like that, they will take Kambo for things like that. But they mostly used it for like divination and hunting magic. Nowadays, we're using it for our Lyme disease, our diabetes, our addictions, our childhood trauma, our anxiety and depression, whatever. These are things that don't even exist in the jungle. And the way that Kambo is being utilized now is different. And so it has to be, evolved and innovated to match the novel application of this medicine. I really feel like Kambo is expanding into new horizons and showing us that it has way more capacity to be applied to different things than we originally knew of based on hundreds of years of traditional use. So it's kind of like having its own like renaissance and finding its place in a growing, expanding global world.
What do you think about its role in conjunction with other entheogens? And I know a lot of people will, practitioners that serve bufo or ayahuasca or whatever it is, they'll have a preliminary combo kind of clearing. Actually, I just was with a friend a couple of days ago, and she was telling me, I forget what medicine she was working with, but she said, oh, the day before we did combo, and then we did wachuma or whatever it was. And I hear that quite a bit. It's never been offered when I was around. Prior to my conversation with you, I might have declined it. Now I'm getting reinterested. But what do you see the value being there in terms of physical clearing, nervous system clearing, energy clearing to help facilitate a more positive or deeper experience for people that are going into, a plant medicine kind of space? Another thing, does it bug you when people call Kambo plant medicine? Because it bugs me when people call bufo plant medicine.
Oh yeah, that's
even mushrooms. I'm like, mushrooms aren't a plant.
I tried to create. I've created a new term, amphibiotic.
Cool.
I'm like let's just talk about the frog and toad things. Call them amphibiotics. Or a neurogen. That's another good one. A neurogen. Because a neuron is like a frog or a toad. So yeah, if you won't feel like spreading those new terminology.
I mean, would Kambo fit in the category of an entheogen? I mean, because the way you're describing it and working with it, right? You don't have like a mystical experience per se or visuals, but it sounds like in your work, you're seeing people have something happen beyond just the gross physical. People are having metaphysical insights. There's a change in consciousness, even though we might not think about it in a classical sense that, oh, I was tripping balls on Kambo.
Yeah. I think entheogen is still somewhat relevant because, I do think it does tap into some sort of quantum meta fabric of reality that is a bit distinct from, psychedelic spaces, but it's definitely there. But yeah, I hate when people call it plant medicine. I'm like, plant medicine comes from a plant. Like even mushrooms aren't a plant medicine.
I know.
The biologist in me gets really annoyed. I'm like, it's not technically correct.
I like being social as much as the next guy. I just don't like being sloppy. And if you've ever woken up after a night out feeling foggy, dehydrated, and off your game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For me, that trade-off stopped making sense a long time ago. I still love the ritual though. Chilling with friends, having something in your hand, that moment where the day winds down and conversation and connection open up. And that's why lately I've been obsessed with Vesper from Peak. This is a non-alcoholic drink made with herbs and plant extracts that help you relax without losing your edge. I've been drinking it at dinners and evening hangouts, and what I notice is I feel relaxed, open, and present, but still very sharp. No blurred vision, no slurring, no waking up wondering what happened the night before. It's built with things like lemon balm and tart cherry to help your body unwind, plus Damiana and gentian root for that subtle lift, so you feel good but not sedated. And the best part? Well, you wake up clear, like your brain actually belongs to you and not the night before. So, my lifestylist friends out there, if you want to be social without sacrificing your edge, Vesper is the move. To get your hands on some, here's what you do. Go to peaklife.com/Luke. That's PIQELIFE. Peaklife.com/Luke to save 20%. Drink like you've got somewhere to be tomorrow, because you probably do. That's peaklife.com/Luke. So I think I derailed you, but take me back to its role in, a suite or an entourage of other medicines. How does it assist? When can it be counterproductive, and so on?
Yeah. Personally, I generally am not encouraging people to stack medicines. I don't think that is always the case, but I think when you start stacking tools and spirits, you need some mastery. You better know what you're doing. And I think that you probably should have an established relationship with each substance before you are doing that yourself or condoning someone to do that. Because it's kind of like going on a first date with like 2 women at once or whatever, like you're not really going to be able to dial in and understand what your relationship is with that medicine or that spirit. I know a lot of people swear by it in certain ways. And I do have experience, personally and with select individuals in doing Kambo like the day before doing ayahuasca. And it has been, kind of more potent. It definitely increases psychoactivity of psychedelics.
Really?
For sure. I've done Kambo and then like LSD the next day, and definitely like enhances the visuals.
I wonder if it's like polishing the neurotransmitters or you're like getting the plaque out of your brain or something. You know what I mean? I picture just kind of like polishing the system, and then it would make sense that
or just enhancing like receptor expression and thing. I suspect there's a dopaminergic boost that comes, downstream from the Kambo's effects. But so it can augment the psychoactive properties of these things, which for some people might be good. I've also had it go the opposite way where, then I'm way too high the next day. I've drank, a medium-sized cup, and I'm basically, getting like serotonin syndrome and frying out my entire nervous system. And I just think it can be destabilizing for people when they're mixing all these really powerful tools at once without any sort of baseline of what each tool has done for them to begin with. I've talked to a number of Bufo practitioners who swear by giving people Kambo and then Bufo. They insist that it kind of removes a lot of the turbulence of the Bufo. But the one concern for me is that, they're often, like some people are giving people Kambo an hour before Bufo, like immediately before. And they're still vomiting from the Kambo going into the Bufo experience, which to me is increasing, risk of asphyxiation.
Yikes, that sounds so terrible.
But it's like a really popular thing.
Really?
I'm like, just give it 24 hours. Like, fine, you want to do Kambo, like clear your aura or whatever. Do Kambo the day before. Like it's just give it some time, there's no rush. We don't need to stack everything all at once and just destabilize people. Bufo on its own is already incredibly destabilizing. And so I can't even imagine like going through Kambo and then going through Bufo all in an hour and then being sent home. And, usually integration is lacking for a lot of people that go through that experience. So I'm generally not a fan of stacking those. It also can be very dangerous to do Bufo and then Kambo. It doesn't happen to every person, but there is this phenomena that has been documented enough that it seems to be true for some people and not others for whatever reason, where they do Kambo after Bufo and they end up in these like multi-day vomiting spells. Maybe they're having reactivations as well. I've heard from other practitioners that have witnessed it. They said it's really ugly. Every time they've seen it happen, they thought that person was going to die. Anytime you have days of vomiting, you have electrolyte disturbance concerns, which can be fatal. So I just don't think it's worth it. Like I don't, Kambo can clear you out and you can do it in a few days or in a week. Like it'll still serve its purpose in preparing you for your psychedelic journey, in my opinion. But when you just kind of, punch, it feels abusive to me. Abusive not only for the person receiving, but also to the spirits that are really there in like devotion and service to helping people. And it just feels like it can be ungrateful to just put all the medicines in one weekend just to, smack people in the face and make them feel like they got their money's worth or whatever it is.
That sounds terrifying. I mean, Bufo doesn't require any help. You know what I mean?
And neither does Kambo. That's why I'm like, they're so potent on their own. Like, why? Why would you do that to yourself?
What are some of the counterindications with Kambo? What are the risks involved? It's not illegal as a controlled substance, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's unscheduled. So
Okay.
currently in the US and most parts of the world, it's not illegal.
I mean,
or
it's
regulated.
obviously not the kind of thing a normal human's going to be drawn to abuse or overuse, right? It's not a very pleasant experience. And I know people say, well, psychedelics aren't, addictive, but there are people that abuse
Yeah.
psychedelics, but it doesn't seem like Kambo would have that issue. So maybe it's able to exist under the radar of the authorities because of that, right?
I think it's also still just so new. It wasn't even introduced into the West until the mid 80s by Peter Gorman. So I think it's just still very underground and fringe, but it could become criminalized. And I think it is starting to become on the radar. It's growing. As far as contraindications, we're still really learning what those are. Because like I said, in the jungle, they don't ask those questions. They don't have these health conditions. They're not on medications and things like that. Kambo is remarkably compatible with a whole array of pharmaceutical medicines, which a lot of people aren't expecting, right? Because they know with ayahuasca, oh, I can't be on an SSRI, I can't be on a benzo, whatever. But that's actually not the case with Kambo. So in a way, it's a very accessible medicine, no matter where somebody is at in their medical journey most of the time. And it is, remarkably safe, even for people with really fragile health. I've served so many people with, multiple sclerosis and Lyme disease and, just really severe chronic issues. And you do have to approach them differently for their safety, but the substance itself can be really supportive, even someone who's, wheelchair bound and things like that. What we kind of know so far around medications is mostly it appears that drugs that interact with the opioid system have the most interaction with Kambo, at least from my experience and my observation. And this makes sense because, the secretion contains peptides that have very powerful opioid binding effects. So when I've worked with people that are, on Suboxone, maybe they're trying to wean down onto kratom or something, or people that are taking kratom, people that are on low dose naltrexone, things like that. Any sort of opioid activity, they can be very sensitive to the Kambo. You give them 1 point and the stuff coming out of them is really dark and nasty, and they just get slammed by these single points. I've seen that consistently. So I do feel like opioid activity can, augment the effects of Kambo. What's interesting as well is I've seen drugs that have opioid binding activity show similar effects. So ketamine, which has some kappa opioid binding affinity, and ibogaine, also kappa opioid. And there is a phenomena that when people kind of have freshly taken one of those substances, they can present very similarly to someone that I would expect to be on an opiate or Suboxone or something like that. Now here's where the 5-MeO-DMT is quite interesting. So, it's not categorized as an opiate, obviously, but it does bind to the sigma-1 receptor. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Mm-mm.
It's part of where all the immune modulating properties of DMT, NN-DMT, and 5-MeO-DMT come from. But what's interesting about this sigma-1 receptor is that initially it was categorized as an opiate receptor, which is why it has the Greek naming, the delta opioid and the mu opioid. But then later they decided it was its own thing, but they had originally categorized that as such because they found that it did bind to some opiate drugs. So my theory in why there is an interaction between 5-MeO-DMT and Kambo sometimes in some individuals, I'm wondering if the 5 is causing some sort of conformational protein change in the receptor of the sigma-1 receptor, and perhaps some of these opioid peptides from the Kambo are interacting with that receptor in some way, which makes sense because they're opioid binding molecules. So they might be interacting with the sigma-1. And I would love to find this out. I would love to find a third-party lab and explore that more. But I think that could be the connection between the reactions that you're seeing on the people that are doing the 5 and then the Kambo shortly after, and then having these like violent reactivation barf fest for several days on end.
Oh my God, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Even when you have a 5-MeO reactivation, or as I like to call it, night school, it can be terrifying, even if you feel really good physically. I can't imagine you wake up in the middle of the night, it's 2 a.m., and you're like in a full bufo journey and also puking your guts out. That does not sound fun.
No. Yeah, and so as far as medications go, Kambo plays nice with almost anything. People can be on antidepressants. They can be on benzos and Xanax and things like that. They can also be on steroids and immunosuppressive drugs, which is not my favorite because you're going to augment the immune system. And so you need to be strategic about that. But as far as health conditions, there's a few kind of agreed upon contraindications, but I've got to be honest, I think they're mostly theoretical. Right? They're kind of like, well, let's not fuck with that. History of heart attack or stroke or pulmonary embolism, things like that. Some people consider a lot of conditions contraindicated that I don't necessarily consider contraindicated. For example, seizures. Some people might say you don't serve someone with seizures. When I think about like the pharmacology of Kambo, again, I know there's strong opioid effects, and I know that opioids are notorious for dramatically reducing like glutamate signaling, and glutamate signaling is largely what drives the excitotoxic cascades that create seizures. And so just from a mechanistic perspective, I'm like, I don't know that Kambo really is going to enhance someone's ability to have a seizure, perhaps the opposite. And I've definitely never seen it in my practice. So for me, that's not a contraindication. While I definitely exercise caution and encourage everyone to really, feel into how qualified they are to take on certain cases, same thing with bipolar disorder. Some people that are diagnosed as bipolar do not really have, proper manic episodes. And that is really the main concern, is that you can kind of stimulate someone into an abundance of dopaminergic transmission, and then they're, going to have some sort of like psychotic break or manic behavior. That definitely is a concern and a contraindication in my mind. But if somebody is just depressed, and I always kind of question people's bipolar diagnosis anyways, because sometimes I'm like, I don't know how bipolar they really are. I think people get slapped on with those labels. I've worked with a lot of bipolar people successfully, and I work really cautiously and gently with them, and they don't get pushed into manic episodes. I wouldn't work with someone schizophrenic or on like a antipsychotic medication because of an ongoing battle with psychosis. For me, that would be a clear contraindication. I would not serve someone who's pregnant just because we don't know enough about what the effects of the fetus could be. There are potential abortive effects that can happen in like a late stage pregnancy, especially, not so much early stage. There is a rumor that they use, Kambo as an abortive in the jungle, but not really. It doesn't work very well in early pregnancy. And I don't think that they really think about aborting children on purpose in the jungle, so definitely don't recommend anybody, use Kambo for that. Yeah, and with autoimmune conditions, largely I've seen it immune modulate people and help them significantly, but there is an immune boosting aspect to Kambo. And if that is not, modulated and regulated appropriately, it can augment, your immune response in certain ways. And that definitely happens with me and my lupus. And I have to be very careful about how I use Kambo and other immunogenic substances, even probiotics, things like that. If I do a bunch of Kambo, I will start to feel, my nervous system become inflamed, and some of my like lupus symptoms to kind of get augmented. So like everything, I think balance is really key, but Kambo is remarkably compatible with so many different conditions, so many different medications, and so many states of health. And I'll just emphasize again the importance of the practitioner's experience, their training, probably medical knowledge, because like you're basically operating as an unlicensed medical provider in some way, if we're honest here. And yeah, their ability to evaluate and customize the approach with each person is absolutely critical, because a lot of these trainings are pumping out these like cookie cutter protocol trained practitioners, which is really no different than just allopathic medicine, right? Like, oh, well, the clinical trial, we use this dosage for this disease. And that's how we're still thinking about Kambo sometimes, when we really need to be tuning into the individual, listening closely, doing things like test points so that we can evaluate people's sensitivity and make informed choices about dosage, and be trauma informed as well, and not just kind of punching people into the ground and putting their body and their psychology in a contracted, stress response that's going to be counterproductive for their healing.
What about the effects on addiction, whether it be opiates or, in my case, nicotine?
I've seen it work really well for addiction. I've definitely had clients who have used it for smoking cessation. I will say it hasn't worked for me, but the thing about, I have the same problem. The thing about addiction is, right, it's like there's a chemical aspect of it always, but you also have to want to quit, right? You have to really, really
Absolutely.
Want to rewire your habitual
That's
use
why I
of
haven't quit
something.
nicotine. There's like part of me that wants to, but a bigger part that doesn't.
100%. I feel you. So I
It's
think
like the cost to benefit ratio thing, right? I mean, there's a large category of mind altering substances that I will never touch my entire life because they were so problematic. But then there are some that are kind of in a more gray area in terms of my relationship with them.
yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you try to like, well, could I just mitigate the, damage so that I could keep enjoying these cigarettes? Or
With
whatever?
nicotine, it's been so kind of affirming in a bad way. There's a lot of great research coming out now with nicotine in terms of spike proteins and I mean all kinds of stuff that I see in the Telegram realm and Telegram health. You know what I mean? I'm like, wow, it turns out nicotine is really good for you in a lot of ways. Probably not if you overuse it, but that's the thing. It's like poison or medicine.
100%.
The dose, the intention, your background, all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's super complicated, right? Like our relationship with substances, is not black and white. So when it comes to addiction, I think if someone has a really clear intention that they want to change that aspect of their life, then Kambo can, scramble the grooves a bit and give you that temporary spaciousness to like forge a new pattern. But like you said, if part of you just wants to keep doing it, which I feel you, it's not going to happen, It's not going to magically do it for you.
In your experience or I know the research is limited, but when we look at Iboga and then Ibogaine, I mean, there is a lot of clinical data to support people, not only being freed of addiction, but facilitating a more easeful withdrawal experience.
Yeah.
Which is like with opiates. As a former opiate addict, I can attest that once you get past a certain point, you really don't feel it. You're just trying to stay well. And once you start getting dope sick, I mean, there's very few things you wouldn't do to get well, right? And that becomes a barrier to entry on getting clean, because it's just like you don't want to go through that 3 or 4 days of hell, even though you're not really enjoying it or getting the benefits that you did in the beginning. Which, of course, with something like heroin are very short-lived.
Yeah.
It goes from like fun to not fun pretty quick. But I know there's people that are addicts, especially with opiates, listening, that are like, yeah, this sucks. I can't get out just because I can't get through that first couple days. And so, I think with Ibogaine, Iboga, and things like this, I mean, I've not experienced it, but I have met people firsthand that are like, yeah, I went in and I barely even noticed the detox. I'm like in a journey and I walk out and I'm detoxed and not dope sick. And now I have like at least a couple day head start towards sobriety. Have you seen anything similar to that with Kambo?
Yeah, it definitely can help mitigate the, opioid withdrawals. I think it needs to be used very carefully for that purpose. Ideally, even like very, very low doses, perhaps even like twice a day for a couple days under supervision. You have to make sure that someone doesn't sneak off to the bathroom and use, have a weak moment. And, using other tools like electrolyte supplementation and maybe NAD plus, like subcutaneous or IV or whatever, to support them. But yeah, it can be done. And the peptides in Kambo do have such really powerful opioid effects that they bind, more securely than most other opiate molecules. So I imagine that they would kind of displace other opiate drugs that are in the system and probably kind of correct that whole system of receptors in a way that kind of restores some balance and mitigates those withdrawals. But yeah, it'd be great if we could actually research this stuff and have data on it, because anecdotes are awesome and we have so many of them with Kambo. Hundreds of thousands, millions of people have taken Kambo at this point. But we just don't have any data. And a lot of people don't take something seriously until there's data.
Yeah. Meanwhile, someone like you has thousands of subjective experiences or objective, bearing witness to miraculous, inexplainable healing experiences for people. I imagine that must be frustrating at times when there's, you can't just go to PubMed and be like, see, I told you, this is what I've been seeing for years.
I mean, I have data too, and I can't get that published either. So
right.
Yeah, it's, sometimes it can, you can feel like you're fighting the good fight, but it's a journey and I'm enjoying it. So.
We all know the modern industrial food system is unethical and toxic. Even well-raised meat gets polluted by how it's processed after the animal is harvested. So the question becomes, how do you feed your family food that's actually clean and sustainable? Enter Real Provisions from Sacred Hunter Monsal Denton. Their wild axis deer and organ jerky bites are pure, savory, and loaded with nutrients you just can't get from farm-raised meat. Their wild venison has 8 times more omega fatty acids than grass-fed beef and higher vitamins from the animal's biodiverse diet. Plus, when you eat Real Provisions, you're also helping fix a real ecological problem. These imported axis deer have no predators in Hawaii, so populations have exploded. This means the land is overgrazed and the animals end up starving while the ecosystem collapses. Responsibly managing the population reduces suffering, relieves pressure on the land, and helps the remaining animals thrive. I know I say this a lot, but you guys gotta try this stuff, and here's how you do it. realprovisions.com/Luke and enter the code Luke to get a free bag of venison chips with your order. If you want to eat with integrity, Real Provisions wild axis deer and organ jerky bites are the way to do it. They're good for animals, people, and the environment. And here's what's up. They taste delicious too. I am obsessed with this stuff. Try it for yourself and find out at realprovisions.com/Luke. Tell me about what people will find at kambospecialist.com. Is this training for would-be practitioners?
So we have educational resources for every person on the spectrum, whether you are Kambo curious, maybe you're already engaged with Kambo, you want to self-administer, or maybe you're ready to step into a practitioner role. We basically got your back from start to finish. We just launched a new ebook called What the Frog is Kambo and Am I Ready?, which I think is important because it's a 22-page ebook document that really takes someone through everything that they need to know to properly evaluate whether Kambo is a modality that fits their needs. And it helps them, make responsible choices around choosing a practitioner, evaluating their readiness, understanding informed consent, and, what's likely to happen. So I encourage anyone listening, if you're curious about Kambo, check that out. It's like $7. It's like a cup of coffee, and it can help you make or break your Kambo experience by, choosing a practitioner wisely and just making sure that you are fully prepared. We have some mini courses too, if you're interested in like diving deep on the pharmacology of Kambo's peptides and the science that does exist in the literature, what we know, what we don't know. There's many courses on that. There's many courses on the history of Kambo. We have self-administration courses. So if someone's feeling ready to, start their more personal relationship with Kambo. And then we have in-person courses for Kambo practitioner training, because that's not something that you can really learn online. There has to be a lot of practical application. And we actually have a coupon code for any of your listeners if they want to
awesome.
get the discount. Yeah, it's LS10, Lifestylist or Luke Story, depending on what you prefer. And I'll give you guys 10% off. So LS10,
okay, cool.
You can put that in and, just a little discount.
And I appreciate that. And we'll link that and everything we talked about that's linkable at lukestory.com/combo. What about, I want to dig into some of the other ailments that you've seen people get results with. Something that comes to mind just because it's close to home is allergies, which is a huge issue for people here in Texas. There's not like a allergy season. Every season here is allergy season. They're just a different one. So my wife has never had allergies in her life. We moved here and it's like, it's bad sometimes. Is that something you've had any experience with, just as one random example?
Yeah, I think for some people, they find Kambo can improve their allergies. But if I'm honest, I think it could potentially go either way. I have seen that if someone overuses Kambo, I do think it can augment like mast cell activity. And, if someone's like regularly using Kambo all the time, especially in lower doses, like the microdoses, sometimes people can develop like rashes and like, sensitivities to foods and stuff like that. So again, everything in balance. But I have heard of a few stories of people saying that their seasonal allergies improved a lot. Probably because, I'm sure like the gut microbiome and just all the immune modulation that can happen with Kambo and clearing pathogens and chronic infections and things like that could potentially result in, later cascades of like immune modulation. I don't really know for sure though, because, as a practitioner, you see people in these like vulnerable moments and then you check in on them, a few days later, they maybe tell you something amazing, but you don't really know what's happening in their life 3 months later, 6 months later.
You don't have a longitudinal study capacity with people.
Yeah. At least with the study, we did actually look at 3 months, but we didn't ask them about allergies. So that would be really cool to look at too. But yeah, I guess I don't really know for sure. And what I do know also is that it's not always consistent, right? Like sometimes people get certain types of results and other times people will get other types of results. And it's a bit of a mixed bag. And that's part of why I like it, because it's like novel and unpredictable in a way. But you never really know how things are going to unfold for somebody. But I generally don't see people get worse in their health.
What about Lyme disease? That seems to be one that people are really mystified by. And they're, now with the kind of prevalence of alternative modalities, there's a lot of different things I hear about in the periphery that people are having success with. But because of our bio-individuality, it doesn't seem like there's a one-size-fits-all. Same with cancer, right? It's like,
yeah.
I don't think I would ever get chemo or radiation, but I've known people that have had that and walked away cancer-free, and they're stoked. And some people, it's made them worse. And I know people that have done every alternative modality in the world and still succumb to cancer.
Yeah.
And others that did the one thing, the apricot seeds or whatever, and they're good. It's just, I know that it's very unpredictable, but Lyme disease seems to be one that's becoming more prevalent. And really difficult to treat.
Yeah. So from my experience, Kambo is very effective for increasing the quality of life in, people that have Lyme disease. Does it eradicate the bacteria? I don't know. Do I even believe personally that the bacteria is the full story? No. I see Lyme disease more as an immune dysfunction syndrome that is often accompanied by a bacterial infection. And, sometimes you see these co-infections. Oftentimes, Epstein-Barr virus is implicated as well. So I don't know how much I really believe in like an eradication approach as being the solution. Yeah, you do need to have like a reasonable microbial load. And if you're immune compromised because of stress or trauma or deficiency or whatever, then you're going to become a sitting duck for organisms to throw a party. And until you have boundaries in your body and probably also your life, you're not going to be able to say like, hey, you guys can't just grow to this proportion and take all my resources. Like fuck off, And so Kambo, it does have this immunogenic effect, right? It's going to boost the immune function, which I do think enhances the body's ability to like actually hold boundaries with pathogens in a way that maybe is out of whack once people are kind of in the full-blown spiral of chronic illness. So I don't think it's necessarily that the Kambo has these like direct antimicrobial effects, because even though there are peptides that show that, like the dermaceptins, the quantity of them that get through into the bloodstream and then get distributed to where pathogens actually live, there's probably not a lot of direct contact happening. So I think there's more of like an indirect augmentation of your body's own immune intelligence, which I would argue is probably better anyways. So I do think that it helps people clear out infections and find like a homeostatic balance with, harmonizing with organisms in their body and restoring like intelligent immune function, because that's really what's gone wrong in these types of syndromes. It's that, the immune system's underactive in certain areas and then it's overactive in other areas, and it's super confused about what's friend, what's foe.
Right,
it's attacking your tissue. There is an inherent autoimmune element to things like Lyme disease and all these kind of chronic infection related immune dysfunctional syndromes. And I think that's mostly what drives these type of illnesses for people, is like the downstream immune function, and then the bacteria come because nobody's telling them to get out, and it's a bit of a snowball effect. So, Kambo is really effective on a physiological level for addressing those things, but the piece that I think is the most important is actually the psychosomatic aspect. I'm sure you might have a similar experience where when you interact with people that have chronic illness, almost always there is an undercurrent of trauma and emotional pain, right? Which then leads to like nervous system dysfunction and dysregulation, and your vagal nerves all screwed up. And then all of that, it's like these downstream cascades of immune dysfunction, immune compromisation, because that's what we know stress response does, right? It shuts down the digestion. You're not getting nutrients. It shuts down the immune function, shuts off reproduction. None of those are essential when you're running from the lion. So if you're a child living hypervigilantly in a house that feels unsafe or whatever, your nervous system is going to just be in this like chronic sympathetic overdrive all the time. And that's what I see in all these people that have Lyme disease and, all these chronic illnesses. They almost always share that in common. And what I've seen with Kambo is that if you do not address that component of your illness, you will not get better. I've seen people with pristine diets. They've done IV antibiotics. They're on all the supplements, all the, most expensive modalities. But what they haven't done is actually taken responsibility for taking their own agency back, right? And actually acknowledging like where they're not confronting their own pain, that is then trapped in the nervous system and continuing to perpetuate these maladaptive signals to the rest of your physiology. And it makes sense. Your brain is like the master controller, right, of all these downstream systems. So it's not really woo. It might sound like that to people, but there's clear documented mechanisms of action on scientific level of how trauma and stress and nervous system activation, lead to, immune dysfunction and illnesses and nutritional deficiencies, yada, yada, yada. So when people come and expect Kambo to fix them, they say, oh, I heard it cures Lyme disease. It's going to fix me. They don't get better unless they actually are willing to look at the deeper piece of like, I don't feel safe in my body. I don't feel like I deserve love. I feel hypervigilant all the time. Whatever, just insert whatever reason here. But part of being a good practitioner is helping someone kind of excavate that stuff, because they might show up to you, hey, I want to treat my Lyme disease. But you need to be able to guide them without invalidating them or gaslighting them or, making them come up with a made up spiritual or emotional reason. But you need to help them explore the deeper parts of their psyche so they can actually like access these things, bring that to the forefront of their ceremony and address that in their experience, because that's when people get better. When they really kind of go like digging deep, they pull out these like, root these seeds of their pain, and they actually like acknowledge them, witness them, and let them sort of neutralize and dissipate, then the nervous system can finally be retrained into feeling safe, into feeling peace. The vagal nerve response can normalize, and then all the downstream stuff will follow. So that's something I really, encourage people. If you're looking for any medicine to heal you, you need to take responsibility for your part in this and find your power, find your agency, because you cannot move forward in your healing until you restore a sense of control to navigating your own life and your wellness.
That's beautiful. So important. I mean, I know many people that have tried all the things. It's like nothing works. And I suspect that it's very common that there are psychological, spiritual, nervous system issues blocking it. But what you kind of made me think of was with some of the other plant medicines and so on that are not known to physically heal you. People commonly have these miraculous healings just because they got in and dealt with their trauma or had a really profound mystical experience, I mean, even some people that have NDEs and they have terminal cancer and they come back and the cancer just melts off their body in 2 days. It's
wow.
Like, it's not because they did something on the gross physical level. It's because they accessed a certain level of consciousness or had a direct and undeniable experience with God, right? And they come back and all of a sudden, as you said, downstream, the body's like, oh, okay, now I have some room to do what I'm supposed to do. I had an interesting experience like that, actually. Just thought of the last time, which might just be the last time, famous last words, I sat with ayahuasca a couple years ago after not having done so for a couple years before that. And I was like, I thought I was done before. And I was like, well, I felt called, right? So I went and had a ceremony, and it was actually very much like Kambo. I just, like, no discernible psychoactive effects. I just got really, really, really sick and super sweaty.
Oh.
And I thought for a minute, I mean, my wife was next to me. I almost had her call 911. I thought like we might have a problem. Houston situation, thankfully she's an adept healer and just held space for me and I was able to breathe through it. And I remember walking back to my room and telling her, I said, so I don't forget this tomorrow, just mark my words, I'm never drinking ayahuasca ever again. It was a nightmare. Fast forward, whatever, next day, drank some wachuma, got back in my body, everything was fine. But what was interesting about that is, it was one of those situations where I thought, oh, nothing happened, right? Because I wasn't getting downloads, I wasn't solving any problems, no information was being revealed to me, no memories coming back that I had forgotten that needed to be addressed and all that kind of stuff. So nothing had really happened. But I was having for, I don't know, 2-3 years before that, pretty reoccurring vertigo, or just be driving or doing whatever. And I was just kind of like brain foggy and dizzy and kind of nauseous feeling. And I went to a couple of neurologists. I looked into it. No one could really figure out what was going on. After that night, until this moment right now, knock on wood, I have never once had anything close to that vertigo feeling ever again. So it's like, and I also didn't have a discernible spiritual experience or any kind of insights that would help make space for my body to heal. I really think that ayahuasca, in its innate wisdom, knew what it needed to do in my body and almost acted like Kambo in a sense, where it physically healed me without me having knowing the mechanism of action or what it even was, like what the cause of it was, So I walked out of that going, damn, respect. It's really a case of these medicines are just, they're beyond our comprehension and the way that they work, So it's like I can see how somebody working with Kambo going in with a very concrete goal in terms of something they want to heal physically, but not having the capacity or willingness to address the psycho-spiritual and emotional part, it not working. And you can also go in and work with psychoactive medicines and have nothing happen and it heals you physically. It's crazy.
Yeah, these things are far more intelligent.
Not wild.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't got to tell you, you're deeply steeped in this, but that one was a huge lesson for me. And just like, wow, dude, don't have expectations, A, and don't write something off because it didn't go how you want it to go, because I wanted the thing, right? That thing. It's very specific to DMT. There's a realm, there's a range there. I really like it in there. When I couldn't get there, I was pissed. Plus, I just felt so terrible. But I walked away humbled and grateful to have been healed of that issue, with having zero intentionality around that.
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen some bit of the opposite happen with Kambo, where it is known for being so physical, and I think people can often disregard the spiritual or emotional piece because they're like, it's not even a psychedelic. And so often I have people come for physical detox or physical healing, and then when it's over, they're on the mat crying and telling me about their childhood, and all this stuff comes to the surface that they weren't expecting, and they have these surprisingly spiritual and emotional experiences that they were totally not prepared for at all.
And not what they signed up for.
No, but like these things, they often give us what we need and not what we want. Yeah. And sometimes it looks different.
Do you think that God or consciousness, works through these substances? How much of it is God that created it, and how much of it is the innate intelligence, say, of a toad or of a frog or of this vine or this plant? I know people that are more aligned in the traditional viewpoint of various plant medicines would say, oh no, it's the plant that has that intelligence or the spirit. For me, still, that's a little bit of a stretch. It feels more to me like God has a language, right? And some of the way that it expresses itself through its language, for lack of a better term, I'm just winging this, is like it might speak through that cactus in a way that makes it seem to me that that cactus is communicating with me, but there's kind of a conductor, right? That's like using that cactus as a tool that I can interface with. But I see it more as the conductor that's the one that's doing the knowing and doing the doing, and that the plant or toad or whatever it is kind of the conduit for consciousness. That's sort of where I arrived at it in this moment. What's your take on that perspective?
Well, it's pretty heady. I would ask, what's the difference between you and I talking as being conduits of God consciousness, right? For me, if we're going to go there, I think consciousness and source it's a bit like a tree, right? there is one source, and then it can kind of go in branches. And that's where I think like things like demigods or plant spirits or even just phylogenetic branches of nature, there are different sort of concentrations and branches of God playing puppet with all these little creatures that he's made with matter, he, she, they, whatever. And yeah, so do I think that like these individual plants have spirit and intelligence? Yes, and they are conduits for God consciousness, right? For source, in the same way that you and I are, right? Like we have our own consciousness, we have our own sense of self, at least currently being alive as this human body. But at the end of the day, we're all still the little puppet skin pulled around, you know? And that's the cool thing about being alive and being an organism, right? Is like we're all just little bits of God interacting with itself. I just imagine like, you know, God just playing puppets like with itself. And that's the beauty of it. And matter, you know, chemistry and biology and these intricate mechanisms of biology, they're all the language, like you said, that God uses to code the world that it's created for itself to be entertained and connected, just for the sake of existing, right? So the answer is yes, and, you know, it's like, I do think that they have their own personalities. I do think that they have their own flaws. I think that they have their own agendas. I've gotten some really weird downloads before, and I'm not like the type of I don't like sit there and do light language and like, I have a download, I need to tell everyone. Like I'm generally, you know, pretty down to earth about those things, but I haven't gotten really concrete messages before when like Kambo and ayahuasca specifically are having temporary disagreements. And because normally I find them to be allies. And I got this like just clear message one time that they were in a little bit of a tiff and they had disagreement about how to move forward dealing with the humans and a little bit of ego. Like I sensed there was a little bit of ego involved, where they were a bit proud and they were like, no, we're going to do it this way. And like, stupid Kambo, you think it's better to do this way. And I actually felt like I got punished once in an ayahuasca ceremony because it could feel the frog in me, very much
interesting,
integrated, and it took it out on me. And then I was like, what the hell was that about? And that's when I kind of got this very sophisticated picture shown to me that there was a diplomatic disagreement happening. And it just made me like realize and appreciate how complex and dynamic these beings can be. Because, you know, even though they might be closer to source in certain ways, they're still individualized to some capacity because they're not just the white light anymore, right? So they do have some sort of identities and personalities and sense of self. So I very much believe that that's true. But yeah, if you just keep following, you know, the tree branches down, they all lead to the trunk at the end of the day. Beautifully said. I appreciate that. Caitlin, I got one more question for you. You ready? Yeah. It's a three-parter. Who have been three teachers or teachings in general that have made you who you are today? One of them, without a doubt, would be one of my indigenous maestros, Johnny Java, who sadly passed away about 2 years ago unexpectedly. And yeah, just witnessing him and his connection to the frogs and to his family and just the deep humility and integrity and care and love that he emanated in this world really has touched me. And I continue to be close with his family and continue to co-create good things with them. So I definitely hold a special place in my heart for him. You know, it's funny because a lot of the teachers I've had have taught me how not to be, which I guess is valuable too. I've learned a lot from my Kambo teachers of how I don't want to move through this world. I'm not going to name them, obviously. But yeah, I just, you know, sometimes seeing the damage that can be done when ego does get involved. It can inspire you to show up differently for your students. And it does still to this day. And, actually, strangely enough, Rick Doblin, he's a friend of mine. He's the founder of MAPS. He really inspires me as far as like how to create actionable impact in a field, in a space, in the public's eye. And I really, in a lot of ways, aspire to be like the Rick Doblin of the Kambo space, because I just see the dedication and just, grit that he brings to persevering through all of the challenges to make psychedelic medicines accessible. And that's something I admire and want to channel into the work that I do to continue to steward the inevitable expansion of Kambo with grace, with respect, with reverence, and with integrity. As this medicine grows, we have a responsibility to engage in reciprocity, not only with the Amazonian people who stewarded it, but also the frog itself, and make sure that we are informing people and keeping them safe and equipping them to really get the most out of their engagement with this medicine and reduce harm as much as possible, because this medicine is truly benevolent beyond what I've ever felt with any other, plant spirit or substance. And I think that it's not that difficult to keep people safe and to do a good job. We just have to kind of come back to our hearts and our values. And my goal is to support people in reconnecting to their self, so that it feels easy to walk a path of integrity while utilizing these medicines.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That was a good closer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for making the time to come out here and see me in Texas. I'm always looking for, and I sense your humility, so I know this won't go to your head, but when it comes to an important topic like this, people show up and there's always opportunities to host someone on a podcast, but I'm always kind of waiting for the OG. Like I want the person who's most deeply invested in or experienced in whatever said topic or modality is. So did we meet through Todd Shipman? Do you know Todd?
Oh yeah, I was the first person to serve him. Okay. Yeah, he took one of my courses.
So yeah, I think he was the one that recommended you to me. Oh. And and so I'm sure I asked him like, yeah, but is she the one? Like, I want the OG. I want the most badass, so you definitely delivered that. I appreciate your dedication.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your dedication to the work and, walking with integrity in this space. It's, it's unregulated. Things are wonky. And I really appreciate when someone has the reverence that you do. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks so much for the opportunity. I feel that, this information needs to be shared. The frog's out of the bag, as they say, and we are at a pivotal moment where we need to inform people about this so that we can preserve our access to this medicine before we mess it up. So I appreciate the platform and the ability to kind of have my voice be heard and provide that support to others.
And that, my friends, is what we call a wrap. Thanks for hanging out on this week's episode of The Lifestylist. But before I sign off, I want to remind you about one of the best ways to support the show while also upgrading your life, my online master market. That's where I've curated a collection of my favorite lifestyle design products, world-class supplements, EMF protection gear, water purification, blue light solutions, biohacking tech, and tons more. And these aren't just random health products. I mean, you can find that on Amazon. I've tested and vetted every item on the site. So if you see it there, it's something I personally use and trust. So if you've ever wondered what brands I actually use day to day or where you can find the gear I'm always talking about, the Master Market is your one-stop resource. To check it out, head over to lukestory.com/store. You can browse around, pick up some upgrades, and know that every purchase helps this show keep trucking. And the best part is that nearly everything listed there comes with an exclusive discount just for Lifestylist listeners. So you get cutting-edge tools to optimize your mind, body, and spirit and save some dough in the process. Again, that link is lukestory.com/store. Get in there and dig around and stock up on the best of the best. And you can click that link right in this episode description. Oh, and don't miss the search bar while you're there. That's how you can quickly find exactly what you're looking for without getting lost. All right, that's it. Until next time, be well and share this episode with someone you love. Hell, share it with someone you're struggling to love because everyone deserves it.